Okay, so I was mentioning Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, just to mention in terms of the hotbed of intellectual fervor that Hillside Hospital was and remains, is that in terms of Dr. Lieberman's professional progression, he eventually ended up as president of the American Psychiatric Association. So this has been a hotbed of, I think, great intellectual fervor, and a lot of people have attained a certain amount of visibility in this field. And I think what you'll find when I tell you the story of clozapine, that some of us then entered a period of invisibility. And I will explain to you why and how that is that happens. Other folks who were mentioned in terms of my thank you list include colleagues, including especially the Laitmans, Dr. Rob and Ann Laitman, who are here, who are so very influential in helping spread the good news about how clozapine can be used and used effectively. He is the go-to, and the Laitmans are the go-to clinicians as far as handling all the delicate issues involved with proper care and maintenance of people on clozapine. And of course, Angie is on my thank you list as well, because she's been my main supporter for all these years, and all these years are what I plan to tell you tonight. And clicker's working again. So now we're into my main story. And the main story is my clozapine story, the first 52 years. Okay? So a little deconstruction of my title. So when I talk about my clozapine story, it's going to be my story. What I mean by that is a number of individuals will be able to tell you their version of the clozapine story, which is a long story, both how it came to market as well as what has happened since. But my clozapine story is unique in the sense that you'll not only hear it from me, but I'm the only one who can tell you that story, because it is the inside story of how clozapine came to be. So I'm going to tell you at least the highlights of that story. Why the highlights? Number one, we're talking about a 52-year period from beginning to now, and I'm going to show you a timeline eventually of major things that happened along the way. Along the way, there were some really influential steps and individuals who were influential in the process that I think I alone know about and have never publicized. So you'll be hearing from me certain steps along the evolutionary process, because when I left here, as you'll see in a slide or two, when I left here to take over responsibility for doing clinical research with clozapine, there was essentially little known about it and no clear direction as to where we're going to go with it. So we're going to start that 52-year journey, and hopefully by hitting just the high points, it's not going to take up too much of your time. My tagline for the story in general is hope for a new beginning. You'll see why and how that evolved. It's not exactly new with me, but we're talking about these first 52 years. That 52-year period ends essentially today. And my tagline is hope for a new beginning, meaning that I still have optimism that we have a long way to go with clozapine and lots of possibilities for where it might go. So my problem is I've got 52 years and I've got 52 minutes. So how do you do 52 years and 52 minutes without speed talking? That may be a bit of a problem, but although some of you may think it impossible to do 52 years in 52 minutes, I can assure you, in my career, I've taken on other tasks that folks said were impossible. We got them done anyway, so let's just give it a shot. I'm going to show you what my agenda is for tonight. We're going to start with something about the world of serious mental illness way before 1954. And you'll see in a moment why 1954, but I just want to, it will not take long to review basically 2,000 years of history, starting with the Old Testament and the New Testament, but we'll go through that very quickly. Just a reminder that there have been eons and millennia of individuals trying to grapple with the same problems you guys have grappled with your loved ones suddenly experiencing psychosis, and what to do about it and how to deal with it. So we'll touch on that kind of briefly. 1954 is the magical point at which, for the first time in millennia, there was now a medicine, chlorpromazine or thorazine. that actually reduced and relieved some of the symptomatology of schizophrenia. It was truly miraculous. I mentioned the fact that it was 70 years ago because that number is going to come up again when I recount the history of the beginning of clozapine and where we are now. So that era of 1973 to 1975 is a period during which I was given responsibility for doing clinical research with clozapine. So keep in mind what that means is that this was a medicine. You saw the picture of the 2 tablets. That's all we had. We had little information other than clozapine was prepared as tablets for possible investigational use. In the US, there was no commercial clozapine, but there was one guy in East Hanover who was given responsibility for trying to take that molecule in that tablet form and develop it into what might one day become a medicine. As you know, there's no surprises to you guys, that was successful, but it was not at all clear that it would, in fact, be successful. So the story that I'm telling you tonight is a story with many fits and starts, many stops and starts, many hopes, and then many dashed hopes, many opportunities, many missed opportunities, but it was a story with a lot of ups and downs to it. But of course, you know, it was eventually successful, but it was not clear at several key points during its evolution as an investigational medicine that it would ever come to market, and as a result, to your loved ones. 1976 to 1981, I refer to as a period of death and resurrection, and you're going to see when I get into that, that was a very dark period for clozapine's evolution, where it looked as though there was no way in the world that this would ever become a medicine that would go through the investigational process, go through the FDA, and become a medicine that could be used as it's being used so successfully by many who've come to me this evening and told me about their personal experiences. But it was a dark time when it looked as though clozapine was essentially never going to come to market. But as you know, that turned around. By 1989, clozapine was approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and that expanded that hope for new beginnings for individuals who had been frustrated, not well treated, not responsive, poorly treated, and now the hope was that perhaps their lives could start to turn around with this revolutionary new medicine. I'm going to advance the story to 2002 with the suicide risk reduction indication. And interestingly, well, interesting to me, I'll try to explain why it is I talk about saving lives on the one hand and losing hope at the same time. What do I mean by that? I'll tell you shortly. Unwinding REMS, that was a biggie in 2025. I mean, that was massively a biggie. Many of you were involved in that process. I'm going to describe that in a little more detail when we get there, because I want to kind of take you through key time points, but that was really major. And 2025 is turning out to be, I think, a really big year for clozapine, and not the least of which is REMS reduction, REMS elimination. But there are other things going on that I think are important, and I'll get there towards the end of this process. And when you hear me talking eventually about 2026, that's when I'm going to be talking about how the future looks from the vantage point of somebody who has lived and breathed clozapine clinical research for now millennia, well, decades anyway. It seems like millennia. So the thing that I want you to know in advance about 2026 is that clozapine is crucial to what's going to happen in the future. I'm going to explain when we get there, and fortunately for you guys, you know when I start talking about 2026, and you know that I'm almost done, and then we're going to open up the floor and Zoom for Q&A and discussion. So I'm going to hopefully leave lots of time for you guys to do that, and I hope that I'll be able to trigger a lot of interesting questions, some of which may be coming in already. In any case, my associates at their tablets are going to be collecting from here and there a variety of questions for me. So I hope to finish in time, but if nothing else, my spoiler alert, might trigger a question, what do you mean? Clozapine is going to be essential in 2030. This is an old medicine, right? So what can clozapine have to do about the future? I want to tell you, at least from the perspective of this one guy who has lived and breathed clozapine research and evolution over the course of the last 52 years. So that's the general agenda. We're going to go through it briefly, item by item. Luckily, there's a big clock in back, so I'm going to keep my eye on it and make sure that I'm not overstaying my welcome. If they pull a plug on me, then I'll know that I'm definitely overstaying my welcome, but I'll try to keep it as brief as possible and still touch on the main points in this chronological sequence. So what was the world like before chlorpromazine? It was not pretty in the sense that we're dealing with a set of problems that were intractable, that could not be dealt with in any other fashion. What was the prevailing theory of mental illness? Well, it was demonic possession, obviously. You know, if there's something wrong with the individual, obviously it was demons had possessed them. It was the devil's work. And so the primary treatments were exorcism to try to get these demons out. At a more medical level, it included bloodletting, purging of the body, a trepanation, that is drilling holes in the skull, hopefully to let the demons escape, ice baths to chill the demons, steam baths, whirling chairs, ducking stools, cold baths, hot baths, straitjackets, restraints. There was a time in the 1800s where there was a brief theory that blue light therapy might be therapeutic. That did not work. And then there was mercury that was used, especially in the case of neurosyphilis, and in the case of neurosyphilis and related psychoses associated with tertiary syphilis, arsenic. I mention these dates on this slide simply because this is kind of the beginning of the era of medical interventions and the growth and development of medicine as a more scientific discipline. So arsenic, dental extractions, and abdominal surgery, these happen to be two eras in the early development of efforts to try to take a medical approach to mental illness. Happens I wrote a book about each of these, the approaches of trying to eliminate neurosyphilis through use of arsenic-derived medicines. Then the idea of dental extractions and abdominal surgery were efforts to try to rid the body of presumed sites of chronic infection, keeping in mind that we didn't have antibiotics till the 1950s. So the only way to rid the body of presumably chronic sites of infection, like teeth, was extract the teeth or remove the offending organs. Fever induction in the 1930s, and insulin coma electroshock developed in the 30s. So we're developing towards more and more medicalized treatments, but it was not until chlorpromazine in the mid-1950s that finally, physicians had something in their hands that actually worked within the limitations of what chlorpromazine could do. It was dramatic and absolutely revolutionary, and that started a lot of important developments in this country. Chlorpromazine kicked off at least a decade or two of ferocious pharmaceutical development. So once chlorpromazine became available, and it became obvious to a variety of companies that here we have a new class of medicines, then everybody wanted to get into the act, and everybody did. The way in which chlorpromazine was identified, however, is of some relevance, not only to its story, but also to the story of clozapine, and also to the role that you guys have played in the evolution of both chlorpromazine and clozapine, as I'll try to point out. That is, chlorpromazine was not developed in the laboratory and in the early clinical studies as an antipsychotic agent. It was coincidentally or accidentally determined to be a chlorpromazine because clinicians and family members realized that their patients, that their loved ones who had received chlorpromazine, in terms of its original uses as a pre-surgical anesthetic, actually were experiencing symptomatic relief. So it was this kind of casual, informal observation that said, hey, maybe this medicine has some benefit in actually addressing serious mental illness. And of course, it did. But what happened during that time was, because I was involved in in researching psychiatric medicines in that particular period in the late 1960s, early 1970s, it was a time of exceptional investment by pharmaceutical companies on the one hand, and also by the federal government. I mean, the NIMH was just awarding grant after grant after grant to individuals who had something potentially promising to offer by way of better understanding existing medicines. And the pharmaceutical companies were in turn developing medicine after medicine after medicine. It was a hot, hot time. And the nature of the medicines that were developed were essentially all very similar. They were a generation of what in the industry is called Me Too drugs. They all had similar effects as chlorpromazine. Why? Because chlorpromazine is used in the animal laboratories as a model for what other medicines might do. So if a new potential antipsychotic medicine behaved in animals the same way chlorpromazine did, then there was a good shot that if we then studied in humans, perhaps it too will be a chlorpromazine-like drug. And that turned out to be true in many, many cases. So what were, for that era of the 1950s through the 1970s, what was the general observation that you could make and say about those medicines, the chlorpromazine, thorazine, look-alike medicine, including Haldol, Prolixin, and others of that, what we now call first-generation meds? So the general observation was that, in general, these medicines, when they work, will have a quite good effect in reducing positive symptoms in about a third of individuals who receive them. Another third will have marginally favorable results, but perhaps not quite as good as the first group. And then a third of patients who experience no benefit at all from the first group of thorazine-looking antipsychotic medicines. However, those medicines were introduced at a particularly crucial time in the history of serious mental illness care. The asylum system, which had been growing in terms of individuals who were resident in state hospitals for some time, the impact was that policymakers then took the opportunity of medicines that worked even marginally well to say, well, now it's time to reconfigure the system. So we're not telling the story tonight of deinstitutionalization, but it was vastly promoted as now the time to get people out of the hospital because there are medicines that work. But the resulting chaos that ensued by people who ended up in jails where they were not well treated, on the streets where they're not treated at all, is yet another story. But the miracle of chlorpromazine was, in essence, a major miracle, but limited in terms of the number of people benefited and its impact on the social structure by which individuals with schizophrenia and serious mental illness actually receive care or do not receive care. So this had, in summary, I've tried to summarize the therapeutic results of that first generation, 1950 through the early 1970s. But it had really important theoretical implications. Because all these agents were known to block central nervous system dopamine receptors, and as a result, they all induced Parkinson-like symptoms, or what we call EPS, or extrapyramidal symptoms. All of them did that. Those two factors, in terms of the evolution of new medicines, were felt to be part and parcel of the developmental process. I told you there were at least 10 or a dozen companies developing new medicines. The way they developed those medicines was to first try to copy what chlorpromazine did in animals like rats and mice and rabbits in cages, which was typically to, at an appropriate, sufficiently high dose, those animals would become rigid in their cages, much as individuals with drug-induced or chlorpromazine-induced extrapyramidal side effects might develop rigidity or tremor. If those kinds of unwanted effects, clinically unwanted effects, were seen in animals with a new molecule that was under investigation, then the preclinical pharmacologists say, aha, we think we've got a new antipsychotic agent here, a chlorpromazine-looking agent, and so let's see whether clinical research will bear that out. In many cases, it did. In fact, in every case, it did. That whole era of new drug development was based on that chlorpromazine model and the animal model, based on the assumption, which seemed to make perfectly good sense, which was you cannot have an antipsychotic medicine that does not induce extrapyramidal side effects, does not produce Parkinson-like symptoms in patients. The two things were felt to be totally incompatible. So there was an entire generation of new medicines developed that all bore that problem, that side effect, that unwanted side effect. It was regrettable, it was felt, that we have a class of medicines that work, that bears this unpleasant adverse reaction, certainly at doses high enough to produce it, but that is the way it is, and that is the way it's going to be. So it seemed. By the early 1970s, I'm working with Don Klein here and learning from him a lot, including rumors that he's heard from abroad that there is a medicine that people overseas think is an antipsychotic, but it's not producing extrapyramidal side effects. How can that be? Everybody knew as a truism of new drug development that you cannot have an antipsychotic medicine that does not at the same time produce extrapyramidal side effects, produce Parkinson. Impossible. But yet there are these clinical reports. Where are the clinical reports? They come from loved ones like your own who are being treated with a new medicine abroad, and it seems to be working. So that type of clinical feedback, although you don't think of it necessarily as part of research, is where all research, all clinical research starts, with clinical observations of people who are savvy enough to say, I think there's something on here that you might want to know about. So that question was, is it possible that between 1954, when chlorpromazine came out, and the late 1960s, early 70s, when these rumors, maybe there's this medicine that's called Clozapine, does not produce extrapyramidal side effects, actually is helpful in reducing symptoms of serious mental illness? Is it possible? You're staring at and by then ingrained philosophy that says it's impossible. You cannot have that. So the fact that it was impossible, like trying to cover 52 years in 52 minutes, said to me, well, maybe we'll take a shot at it, okay? And so that's what got me to sell my house in Floral Park here and go over to Hillside Hospital, to Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. This information essentially summarizes what I've been trying to say. The no EPS with clozapine seemed to be for most a non-starter. But my sense was, if I could get my hands on the medicine and work with it within the context of a pharmaceutical company, then it's worth a shot. So I took the shot. And so I obviously, I became this future godfather of clozapine, but the story kind of starts here. As far as that designation of godfather, just a little bit about that. Of course, that the history goes back a long, long time. But the actual history of that designation, a couple of years ago, Rob Laitman and I were kind of crapping around, and I said to him, Rob, I've been in this clozapine business for so long, and folks have been referring to me as the father of clozapine. I said, but getting on up there, I think maybe I should be considered the grandfather of clozapine. And Rob said, no, you're the godfather of clozapine. So anyhow, that's how that started, and that kind of continued, and that label has stuck with me ever since, and I've gladly worn that label. So I'm going to ask you to join me in a ride to New Jersey when I packed up my van here in Floral Park and left for New Jersey in 1973. And of course, at that time, hooked up with Angie, who's been with me ever since on this long, long journey. I thank her for that. So take the ride with me, guys. Now I'm going to take you on this journey that I started on in 1973. So you're going to see a timeline on these charts. And so you'll kind of know where we are. And importantly for you guys who are having to listen to me, as that timeline advances, you know we're kind of getting towards the end of things. So in 1973 to 1975, I refer to that as Clozapine Chapter 1. It was a very rocky start. I mean, a really rocky start. I had no idea what I was in for, but as you know, we kind of got through it. So what was that like? I'm going to tell you what it was like, but first I've got to tell you something about what it's like to work in big pharma. So a lot you don't know in any new job, but this was, I mean, I worked for many years in hospital settings. So what did I know? I knew a lot about doing clinical research, but not in a pharmaceutical setting. So everybody, this is a picture of a pipeline. So you've heard that analogy a lot, that there's a pipeline. I want to tell you what my understanding of the pipeline was then and what it is now. But joining a pharmaceutical company was a great opportunity for me. Why? I didn't have to write grants anymore. Remember all that money I told you about that was flowing from the NIH and flowing from pharmaceutical companies, but you had to write grants to get it. That was a big pain in the butt. So once you go to a pharmaceutical company, the money is there, right? Until it's not. That is, the projects can end very, very quickly. I'm going to describe to you something about that process, maybe in the next slide, about how things can stop very quickly, but they can. Because priorities within a commercial entity change quickly depending upon what's going on in the world and what you're learning about the medicine you're studying. One thing that I did not realize, since by the time I joined Sandoz, I had already published a bunch of papers, I had a certain recognition in the field, I did not realize I was going to go invisible. But that's kind of what happens when you join the pharmaceutical company, and I'll explain something about the arithmetic of what invisibility means. And you'll understand that better when I tell you about this pipeline, this long, long pipeline. The pipeline, for me, was a 17-year pipeline. I mean, it ended up successfully. Clozapine came to market, but it took me 17 years to get there. That was inordinately long, longer than most. But what's the assumption about the pipeline analogy? The pipeline is all pharmaceutical companies have within their research department many molecules under investigation at different stages of evolution, right? So let's take a hypothetical. Let's say they got 50 medicines under different levels of investigation, right? So the pipeline has 50 medicines here at this end. And we know it takes different amounts of time. But the assumption, I think, perhaps your assumption, so it was certainly mine, that as that pipeline works at different rates, you put 50 molecules in, you get 50 molecules out. You do not. You do not. The attrition rate within the pharmaceutical industry is huge. Very few actually ever make it out. Conservative estimate is 5,000 to 1. And you put 5,000 molecules in at one end, and maybe you get a medicine out the other end, okay? From the point of view of the clinical investigator, if that process, that 5,000 to 1 process is successful, so you're gonna understand why most people who do this never get lucky like I got, right? I'm visible, I'm the godfather, right? There are very few people like me who make it through the other end, okay? Because what is at the other end? At the other end is this. You've all got them in your little medicine bottles, right? This is the package insert for a medicine. It's not Clozapine, it's any old medicine. I just picked it up. So it's this, and this, and this, and this, and this, Yes, and this is what the process is. This is what you do as a clinical investigator in research, right? It's this. And it's two-sided, okay? It's like 6-point font, right? This is what you do for a living, okay? This is the end product. I mean, the end product is, those two tablets that you saw on my first slide end up at CVS or somewhere. But to get there, it's this, okay? So it's a load of work. A lot of stuff goes into it, and very few actual medicines come out. We'll talk about the package insert because, that is what you do. And I'm going to talk, obviously, about the clozapine package insert when we get to clozapine. But you need to know something about the odds and why it is that most people are invisible and why the topic of miracle is going to come up more than once in this presentation. I'm a living, breathing example of a miracle in a lot of different ways. But one is I got a medicine through the other end of that process that mattered a lot to almost everybody in this room has come up to tell me how much it's meant. So I've been lucky not only to get it through, but I'm lucky now when I hear these stories. So let me tell you a little bit more. So the way it works is, although there are hundreds of people involved, you kind of put the process together in sort of in a structural sense. What are you dealing with, right? So you've got the company, obviously, who has the money, has the interesting molecules, okay? That's the company. And you see them on that side. And you see the FDA regulators on the other side. So what is the company? The company has, and typically you need a lot of money, it's big pharma, but they're intrinsically an aggressive organization. As much as the business that they're in is helping people get healthier, it's a business. They got to make money. And the sooner you get an interesting molecule to market, the sooner you make money. And that's going to have some bearing on one of the miracles that I'm going to tell you about momentarily, not momentarily, but very soon. There are a number of miracles within miracles in this story. But that's the orientation of the business, of the company on the one hand. They've got all this machinery going on. Part of the machinery is complicated. There's many departments. But in the end, they want a product at the end that they can sell and make money with. That's the business. The other major player is the Food and Drug Administration. They have a completely different attitude. They are intrinsically conservative. Why? Because it takes a lot of guts to say yes. There's no application. All the material that went in behind this kind of thing is a load of information, loads of information of all kinds, okay? There's always something you can find fault with, always something you can find fault with. And there's no perfect submission to produce a perfect product label. So it's way easier for the FDA to simply say no, or they'll typically say, well, no, not yet, okay? But do this, do that, and you can be delayed and nickel and dimed to death. So that's kind of the conflicting pressures that individuals like myself have to deal with. That you're caught between an organization that's paying you and prompting you and encouraging you to get it done, get it done, what's taking so long, right? And the Food and Drug Administration says, well, we've got concerns about this, that, or the other thing. So the problem is, how do you negotiate all that? That's the person in the middle. So I don't know how successful I've been in describing to you the pressures and the nerves of steel that it takes to do that. But you can get a better idea of it when I show you my picture from those days, okay? So you will probably recognize me from the profile. But if you don't recognize me exactly, keep in mind I was a lot younger in those days, so maybe it's not quite, but yes, it required a lot of special skills to negotiate that. Superman, well, I'm not sure, but in any case. So there I am, having loaded my van, sold the house here in Floral Park, moved to New Jersey, and now I find myself at Sandoz, a building that'll look very familiar to at least two of us in this room. That's building 701. That was the epitome of the Sandoz complex. It was a many-acre complex. It was a mile around. I know that because I ran it many, many times. And this was a 7-story for that suburban area, kind of a skyscraper, a very special building. It was lush, it was lovely. There was a wood-paneled entrance, and it was the premier location. And you saw my office in 1973 was in that corner of the building. The way in which that building was described among people who worked there was, of course, Building 701, but it was called the house that Melleril built. What does that mean? That means that for the 1960s and into the early 1970s, the big moneymaker for Sandoz Corporation was Melleril. That is thioridazine, a medicine very similar to chlorpromazine from the first generation. So this is a company that had a major stake in antipsychotics. I mention this because by the time I'm through telling you the story, you'll realize that they turned their back on this area. I mean, totally, completely turn their back on it, which obviously I say with some fervor because I kind of wish that they had not turned their back on it. But this part of the story in the early 1970s, what did I know about the industry? What I learned in 2 locations that are not shown in the picture. You cannot see the basement, which is where the auditorium was, and you cannot see the penthouse, which I had no access to. If you were just an ordinary plebe, you could not access the penthouse. That was for board members only. There were maybe a dozen people in the whole complex who had a key for the little 4-person elevator that took you from the 7th floor up to the penthouse. I did get to go there a few times, but you didn't go there, with anything other than fear in your heart, because there was always a possibility that what the board would tell you is, your project is done, it's over. So that was where a lot of decisions were taken. You would never exactly knew what the basis for those decisions were. Like I said, some decisions were taken quite abruptly, and that was certainly true at some points in this history. But in the basement, in the auditorium, every month, there would be meetings of the research department that included people like myself who were clinical project directors. I had Clozapine as my project. There were others who had other medicines, cardiac medicines, diabetes medicines, other medicines in the portfolio, and other departments, pharmacology, toxicology, metabolism, all these other departments would meet for monthly meetings. What was the purpose of those meetings? The purpose of those meetings was to make go, no-go decisions. Remember, the company is there to make money. You make money, obviously, by selling successful products, but you don't want to lose money by investing in losing products. So the idea of reaching no-go decisions early makes a lot of business sense. I mean, I never took a business course, but to me, the idea is perfectly sensible. If you are engaged in a line of research that does not look like it's going to pay off, you stop it as quickly as possible. Keep that in mind. So now we're advancing to the period of 1976 or so, when we're doing phase 1 studies. And phase 1 studies are done in humans. They're entirely oriented toward determining the safety of a medicine and such issues as what's a maximum dose you can reach. So it's all oriented towards safety and dose toleration. But what we're finding, to our surprise, because I'm designing these studies, that my assumptions were not really as good as I thought. We were developing a set of adverse reactions that were concerning, and they included hypotension, tachycardia. These were cardiovascular reactions, but in every instance, we tried to find a mechanism for dealing with those adverse reactions and finding a way to manage them, a kind of attitude that is characteristic of good practice of clozapine medicine to this day. And by 1974, we were experiencing some patients with seizures at doses we did not expect to see that at. But again, we were able to convince FDA and our management that these were manageable reactions that could go forward. And then 1975 came, and agranulocytosis, which I'm referring to as 7 deadly syllables, you know that part of the story, that there were a number of individuals who died overseas as a result of drops in their white blood cell count. That was the period I refer to in the outline as the death and resurrection period for 1976 through 1981, because of the unsuspected cases of agranulocytosis abroad. This is now in the later period of the 1970s. The initial reports that got everybody shook up were 16 cases of agranulocytosis in Finland, but the biggest problem was 8 of those cases were fatal, and everyone panicked. Of course, Sandoz US was part of a larger international company based in Switzerland, and they said, that's it. This medicine is too toxic to develop. That mantra, too toxic to develop, tortured us for many, many years and was the accepted understanding of this medicine. And keep in mind that, as I said, if you can make a no-go decision early rather than investing in a medicine that may not go anywhere, that makes good business sense. And that was certainly the way it looked for that 5-year period, or for much of that 5-year period. During that time frame, when the word came that you have to stop studies and you're out of the research business, I had people working with me whose job it was to visit the investigational sites where work is going on and so forth. And so there's a procedure for closing out a study, an incompleted study. We say, oh, that's it. It's over. Clozapine is not going to be developed any further. It's not going to be investigated. And that process of closing out the randomized controlled trials, that's the RCT, the randomized trials, that went quite smoothly, as predictably. There's a process for doing that. But the thing is, at the same time, we, as many other pharmaceutical companies, had compassionate use studies going. That is, individuals whose loved ones did not do well on existing medicines. They heard there's a new experimental medicine, and the doctors and family members want their loved ones who are not being well treated, and that is successfully treated, to try the new medicine. That's called a humanitarian program or a compassionate use program. We had those studies going. The problem for us trying to close out the studies was the compassionate use investigators said, no, we're not going to give you back the medicine. We don't want to give you back. Don't force us to give you back the medicine. Because the investigators heard the same stories I've heard from almost everyone in this room about their loved ones who had done horribly before, but now are on this new medicine and a compassionate use protocol, and they're doing marvelously better than they had done before. That feedback from folks like you and the doctors, the small, I had maybe 6 or 8 doctors. I don't think I had more than 10 in compassionate use programs with 3, 4, 5, 6 patients. There were probably no more than 30, 40, I don't remember the numbers, but we're talking about that, of cases just like the ones you described, where clozapine has done remarkably better after years of trying other medicines. That is what enabled clozapine to stay active during that 5-year period when it was theoretically closed down. And I was able then to take that kind of feedback and go back to management and keep that humanitarian supply chain open. So we kept that going. Now, you see me, I designated myself a product champion, right? That sounds like a big thing, kind of like a Superman thing, right? Product champion. That's kind of a dirty word in the industry, okay? Why is it a dirty word to be a product champion if you're working? Remember those meetings in the basement with all those other research directors? If you are speaking up for a medicine that everybody knows is doomed to fail, hey, it's too toxic to develop, and you want to keep studying it, you want to keep spending resources on it, I need to, they don't say it out loud, but the idea is there are limited resources. Big pharma companies have loads of money, without a doubt, but they don't have enough money ever to do everything. So in that process, being a product champion and hold on to something longer than you should be holding on to it is not such a pretty thing as far as the other investigators in the company who are looking for the same resources. So during the course of that time, I was able to increase the number of compassionate use investigators, and able to increase the number of patients. So that kept things. So by 1981, the folks in Sandoz overseas had finally analyzed enough of the agranulocytosis data that we were able to come to the conclusion that this medicine had a potentially serious effect that was occasionally fatal in patients who were not well managed, but you could manage this problem with regular white blood cell testing. And so the picture changed considerably in 1981. And at that point, a suggestion came to us from the FDA. As our understanding of this agranulocytosis problem is not necessarily fatal and it's manageable, and we now know how to monitor for it. That message had seemed to have gotten through to the FDA, who sent a message suggesting through an intermediary, and I'll describe how this happened in a moment, that the FDA does not have a fixed policy that medicines with serious adverse reactions cannot come to market. They're prepared to consider medicines with serious adverse reactions problem if the benefits are shown to outweigh the risk. So now there's a possible reason for hope. And so in 1982 to 1983, we put together our first NDA, which stands for New Drug Application, to send to the FDA to see whether they would consider going forward with clozapine. It was clearly an effort to test the water. We knew it could not be an approval, but we did want to find out what the FDA's attitude, would they deliver on the possibility of medicine with serious adverse reactions problems, but good benefits. So that happened. I can tell you that from the point of view of the company, it was a no-cost decision to put the new drug application together. Why? They said, all right, if you think it's worthwhile testing the waters, you can do that, but we're not giving you any more money to do that. They're paying me anyway, but they're not giving you any staff, no additional support. Do it. So it was a very busy year, but we got it done. And so what we found out was, that's what I'm calling the first major miracle, that the FDA actually liked what they saw. It was an incomplete new drug application, and everybody knew it was incomplete, but they said, it looks interesting enough that we'll suggest to you that you go forward with this anyway, but the implication was, and it turned out to be more than an implication, was do it our way. That is, we will tell you what we are looking for, and you'll do it our way or the highway. So we agreed, and Sanders agreed, that they would support phase 3 clinical studies. Phase 3 is the late big phase of clinical studies where a lot of money is involved. But the second miracle that happened at around that time was one that I did not appreciate. I mean, at the time, I had no idea why it was, because it never occurred to me why it was that Sandoz management, the people in the penthouse that we're not allowed to visit, because, hey, what are you guys doing up here? Why they allowed this to develop, because I now realize, I'm talking about a realization that's just come to me over the past few months, was that the patent on this medicine was running out. It was first described and put together as a molecule in the late 1960s. It's now the mid-1980s, and we're looking at 20 years, the end of the patent life. So why would they have endorsed the idea now of doing a clinical study, which would take several years to do, and that would, the conclusion of that study would be after the patent date. Large pharmaceutical companies do not like generic competition, and they know that they make money only during a phase of patent protection. So what happened? I ended up getting a birthday present, it turns out, from the US government. I had no idea at the time that I had gotten that birthday present. Only in retrospect do I realize I got a birthday present in 1984. And I'm going to show you a picture of the donors who gave me this birthday present. You will recognize at least one of them. The guy in the middle is President Reagan, who was signing a piece of legislation. That legislation is called the Hatch-Waxman Amendment, What was the Hatch-Waxman Amendment all about? Turns out, in retrospect, it's the thing that made everything possible. There's another sub-miracle in here that I maybe should point out. That is Senator Orrin Hatch, and that's Henry Waxman of the Hatch-Waxman Amendment. Why is that a miracle? One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. They actually worked together to get some legislation done that helped people, okay? So I didn't realize it at the time. That was my birthday, September 24th, 1984 was my birthday. So belatedly, I got this card. I mean, like I said, I didn't realize until now that Orrin Hatch and Henry Waxman had provided this present to me. What was the present, right? So what the present was, that amendment gave pharmaceutical companies 5 years of patent extension, patent exclusivity, meaning that if you brought a medicine to market, even well after its official, if it came to market, you will get up to 5 years of now patent exclusivity. That suddenly makes it possible for a company like Sandoz to get behind a product because they're going to have 5 years of exclusivity and hopefully make some money in that time period. It could not have happened otherwise. Did I realize it at the time? I did not. I realize it now. So having raised this issue of my birthday, September 24th, 1984, many of you, I'm sure, have been wondering, well, what year was this guy actually born? I mean, what was his actual date of birth, right? And obviously, I could read your minds, I know. So I would like to answer that question for you, but I'm unable to. Legally, I cannot do it. Why? Because your date of birth is a piece of medically confidential information, and under the HIPAA regulations that bind all of us, I cannot tell you that. So I am unable to give you my exact date of birth, regrettably. However, I can tell you that when that amendment was signed, I got a birthday cake with 50 candles on it. So you can form your own conclusions, but anyhow, that was my birthday cake that year. Anyhow, moving on more seriously, let me tell you about the person whose picture is about to show you. So in terms of invisibility in this industry, yes, I remained invisible for quite some time, but a person who remained perennially invisible is probably the true hero of the story. This was my counterpart at the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Paul Lieber. He died last year. He was responsible, number one, for letting me know that the FDA was prepared to maybe consider clozapine. Once again, after all the problems that had arisen with the initial egg monocytosis problems. And he was the one who said, basically, I will guide you in terms of what it is I expect. And he set up the most impossible conditions for a clinical study that one could imagine. And I'll show you a picture of Paul Lieber. He was a little bit older in the picture than when I worked with him, but you can tell kind of by the expression on his face, he was tough. He was tough, but he was fair, and that expression was kind of a tough love expression. It didn't seem it at the time. I said, holy moly, this guy's going to kill me because I don't want to do the study he wants me to do, but yet he holds all the cards. And so we ended up doing the study that Paul Lieber, I'm not going to go into all the details, I don't have time to do that, but because of that particular study that he demanded, we were able then by 1988, 89, to get the FDA approval, to then have 35 years of subsequent clinical success, which I never, ever could have imagined at that time. And the medicine that came to market against all odds has now become the gold standard. We're going to talk about gold standard again. We're going to take on a quick trip through memory lane, a picture that you've seen. You know this guy, you've seen this picture, but what I wanted to point out to you, it may be hard to read, this hope for a new beginning. That was our logo in 1990 when the first medicine first came to market. I continue to use that as my logo for tonight's presentation, but also because I think we are at a point with clozapine where we are possibly facing the prospect in a positive way of a new beginning for clozapine and for patients. This new indication that was birthed with the package insert that came with Clozapine in 1989 to 1990, essentially, as you well know, is for treatment of severely ill individuals with who have failed to respond to other medicines. So the first indication is well known. How unique is that medicine? Just a reminder to put into perspective what we're dealing with. When I say this indication is 1 in 20,000, what's that number come from? The FDA has approved for prescription use in the US a little over 20,000 medicines, each with its own complicated product insert, 20,000. There's only one that has the indication for treatment-resistant schizophrenia, only one. So what we're dealing with is a 1 in 20,000 indication, which is quite amazing. Why don't doctors follow the evidence to use more Clozapine? That's been a common topic of discussion here this evening and will continue to be. I say there's too little signal and too much noise in the sense that other companies who are selling other medicines want to sell it and will bad talk Clozapine, and there's nobody really bankrolling getting the message out about Clozapine. We've had some discussions about how important that is and ways to do that. We haven't solved that exactly yet, but I have some reason to hope. When we brought Clozapine to market, I trained 140 sales reps who went out to talk to doctors, okay? That ended within a few years, but we don't have that now. That's the type of thing big pharma does when they get behind a medicine. They will bankroll it, but there's now nobody really bankrolling this, but there is some reason for optimism. This is the famous paper that grew out of that famous study that Dr. Lieber more or less said, you will do it this way. And that's a famous paper by Gil Honigfeld et al. A little bragging rights here, especially since it's World Series time. I'll just simply point out that our record with this publication, since academics always want to find out how often their paper is cited, this one paper is among the 100 most cited articles in all of psychiatry. At last count, it was number 44 in the top 100 list. So we're definitely in the final runoffs, I guess, for the World Series of famous papers. I want to tell you about this chart. This is not a venue where I was expecting, and I'm not going to be telling you a lot of data, but I told you we're going to be talking about miracles. Miracles. This is one, and it was for a short while a private miracle. There were two people in the world who understood what we were dealing with this miracle. And what this miracle is, when that study that I just showed, the number 44 in the top 100, those data became very public, very widely cited. But what was special about those data, and who were the two people? I was one of them. The statistician who worked for me, a guy named John Patton, who has also died, as have most of the people in the story. So talking about miracles, I'm glad to be telling you the story. There are not a whole lot of survivors. John Patton's not with us anymore, but he was my statistician. He had, this is now in 1989, probably 15 years of experience working with antipsychotic medicines from a statistician's point of view. I had been working with these medicines for 25 years. Never, ever had we seen data that looked like that. So what are the data we're looking at? What we're looking at are the effects of chlorpromazine in our study and the effects of Clozapine in the study. So this is chlorpromazine, this is Clozapine. This is improvement, and this is weeks of study. I'll show you a little bit more about this, but just kind of get the general gist of where I'm going with this. And where I'm going with this is that with chlorpromazine in these patients, in this study, chlorpromazine had a mild effect, it turns out, on positive symptoms, and then plateaued, no further benefit. Clozapine had benefit, and the curve was still accelerating. The improvements were still continuing. So I'll give you a little more information about how that worked out. This happened to be Dr. Lieber, if you remember, the stern-looking guy who was my nemesis for a while. He picked 4 items from the ratings and said, you will study these because these are my items that I consider important in schizophrenia. They were positive symptoms, and this was revolutionary data. Why? For 25 years, I had worked with antipsychotic medicines, and the best you could do was show that they were equivalent to chlorpromazine. This was the first time we have significant data showing clozapine is better than chlorpromazine starting at week 1. It was UFB, which stands for unforgettably beautiful, in case anybody doesn't know that translation. So anyhow, the second miracle was even bigger than the first one. Now we're in my office. It's John Patton and I, the only ones who have seen these data. This was the astonishing second miracle. This is negative symptomatology, where everybody knew for the 30 some odd years going up to there that chlorpromazine has no effect on negative symptomatology. Positive symptoms, yes. Negative symptoms, no. That curve you could superimpose on the curve I previously showed you. Clozapine came through like a champ. It was incredible, incredible. And so that miracle was shared by two of us for a short while. And then, of course, like, wow, look what we've got, it's unbelievable. Anyhow, you can well imagine, but for a short while, we were dumbstruck. I don't think, we both knew what we were looking at, and it was quite incredible. So that was a study of upwards of 300 patients, half on chlorpromazine and half on clozapine. But the thing is, and you guys are, have been, not a surprise to you, but others might have to be reminded, when you look at aggregate data in a journal article, you may not realize that those aggregated data are made up of individual patients, all of whom are responding, not responding. And so we're looking at a patient. We're looking at Kevin. Kevin started clozapine in that humanitarian protocol era before the medicine came to market in the 1980s. He was a rising possible minor league player. He was a very good baseball player from everything that I've heard, had aspirations to maybe become a minor league player. He ended up with schizophrenia, and before clozapine, he was homeless. He was living on the streets. He had delusional preoccupations that nothing ever helped him get rid of. He got to Dr. Meltzer, who was a very important investigator of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, ran a very positive program in Cleveland with clozapine. And of course, Kevin got on clozapine, and with Dr. Meltzer's help, got his life back on track. The story you've told me tonight in just many variations. So that was Kevin by 1992. But the thing about 1992 and Kevin was that he ended up on the cover of Time magazine. In terms of miracles, that is yet one of my favorite miracle stories, how a feature writer decided to take Kevin, once living on the streets, eating out of dumpsters, literally, and having made the kind of continuing improvement as to merit the cover of Time magazine, usually a place for prime ministers, statesmen, famous actresses, but this is Kevin Buchberger, just a kid from Cleveland who made an astounding recovery. You might want to know that last year, I guess about a year ago, I called Kevin, see if he's still around, and he is, okay? So Kevin, as of last year, very proudly told me, of course, he's still on clozapine. It's now, what, this is 1980s, it's now 40 years later. Still on clozapine, and he's been employed. He said he has just retired, which means he just turned 65, just retired, living in his own paid-for condo, he told me, and driving a Toyota RAV4, and just enjoying life. So, all good. Let's hear it for Kevin. 2002, we're going to be getting to the end of the story pretty quickly. Saving lives, you all know about the suicide risk reduction indication. Again, it was something that was totally unknown, unsuspected at the time. But again, Dr. Meltzer was a major influence in getting Sandoz to endorse a study. And I think I may know the answer. Maybe you can already anticipate what I think the answer is, but what happened with the suicide, it was a huge study of almost 1,000 patients, and we know we got the second indication, that clozapine now has 2 major indications. But once again, I put the odds of this happening at, again, in the 1 in 20,000. Again, there is no other medicine in all of the PDR, the book that contains all the package inserts in small print. There's only one, again, clozapine is totally unique in all of American medicine in having a suicide risk reduction indication. To me, that was astounding that we're able to support that. And again, why don't doctors follow this recommendation and prescription? We don't really know why, but my sense is that that could have been entirely different. That I don't understand to this day why it was that at that point the company Sandoz had been merged and became Novartis. And Novartis supported this study, a very big study, and got an actual indication on a package label. If I tell you how much difficult it is to get an indication on a package insert, it's almost inconceivable that a company would then turn away from a brand new a new indication, and one that is as unique as this was, but yet they did. On one day, the word came down out of the blue that we're no longer supporting clozapine, and that this would have been a situation for potentially building a field force, developing a marketing program, getting the word out. They just simply turned away from it. My only guess, I actually called Dr. Meltzer not that long ago to say, Herb, do you understand what happened? Why did Novartis turn? He doesn't know either, but I'm guessing from what I told you about patent life, that because the patent had expired, maybe somebody finally realized, like, what are we doing? We're going to put money into a product that is no longer patent protected, and then other generic companies will be selling it and not us. I'm just guessing that that was the reason, that was a commercial decision. But had they put some money behind it to market the idea, more doctors would be aware and more lives would be saved. We're getting close. As you see, we're at 2025. So I'm making a big jump in time. And I will summarize very quickly and wind this up so that we can have some open discussion from you folks and from folks on Zoom remotely. What happened in 2025? I think this has been a big year for clozapine, starting with the unwinding of REMS. As you know, I've had some responsibility and interest in developing a new indication for clozapine, an anti-aggression indication. And for the first time, we have heard, as recently as just last week, that there will be a program of CNA courses, webinars that will be run by some very talented and well-experienced people. So let me just review those quickly, and then I'll just spend a minute or two telling you where I think we may be going in 2026. So a new beginning for clozapine, I think, so that original idea about a new indication, a new beginning for clozapine, I think is relevant. REMS elimination, we all know about, that was really huge. Just a reminder of what it took to get there. It took a lot of activity by advocates, including some of you who were there at that meeting, and it was very effective. There's no better example of the role of advocacy, I think, than the REMS elimination. Yes, there are some familiar faces you may recognize there. I was not at that meeting physically. However, in my godfather role, I was there in the sense that the FDA had opened up a docket where individuals could provide information. I was one such individual. I was a minority among the professionals that is mental health illness professionals who submitted information as to what they should do about REMS. My minority view was get rid of it, eliminate it. I provided a rationale, of course, for why I felt the time had been long past where this was serving a function and it was being non-productive, et cetera, et cetera. But I did one other thing, and I have no idea whether this impacted the FDA at all, but you guys know that I worked with FDA for many years, so I'm accustomed to dealing with them. So besides providing a rationale for them as to why I thought REMS should be eliminated, I also provided a draft package insert as to what it might look like if they decided to do that. And whether that helped or not, I think it didn't hurt. But in any case, that was kind of the special slant that I was able to do with my submission to the FDA in support of elimination. But I was present in yet another invisible way. And what was that? See those T-shirts? My idea, okay? My idea, all right? Wear T-shirts, and the wording was mine, okay? Rachel Strife in Arizona was the one who put it together, but I've got mine. So, okay, how do I look? Okay, not bad, right? So hold on to these guys. I think they're really important memorabilia. I'm not going to say too much more about that. We know how that happened. The theme was micromanagement by the government just destroys lives. And the moms to the FDA basically said, let doctors be doctors. And then the next topic I wanted to deal with was my idea about this anti-aggression indication. And so finally, I've kind of come out of the closet. So The Godfather made a public appearance. So that effort to get this new indication bears my name. So if you go to the FDA docket, which I hope you will find that this is a citizen petition submitted by me trying to get a third indication for anti-aggression. I feel that it simply rounds out the information we have already with the second indication. Suicide is essentially aggressive act turned inward, self-harm. And many individuals with poorly treated psychosis have problems with aggression turned outward. So I think we can make a rationale with a lot of supporting data that it's time for that third indication. And that is something that I am trying to do. And I'm hoping to enlist, we now have 100 other commenters on the website. And if any of you have not commented so far, please do so. We learned last week, as I said, that there is now foundation support for Clozapine CMA courses. They will be free, and they will be offered by leading lights, including John Kane has one program, one webinar in that series. Ray Love, I guess I should have pointed out that you were in that picture, Rob, but you look very well there. But yes, you were in the picture of November 19th. And so there are a number of all-stars. I reminded of that because Ray Love and Deanna Kelly, who are also near you, are also among the educators who are getting that information out. I said I'm going to end at 2026, and here we are. What does the future look like, and why did I say that there is no future for new breakthrough mental illness treatments without Clozapine being part of the picture? Because we are the gold standard. What do we mean by the gold standard? Two major things. If one were to look at Clozapine now as an epidemiologist might, we have reduced morbidity, that is, patients are less symptomatic than they were, and mortality. We have life extension with Clozapine. Okay, so we are the first and only, what I'm now calling a broad spectrum major tranquilizer. I'm getting into the semantics business. I think Clozapine is more than simply an antipsychotic. I think its antipsychotic effects are embedded in a larger picture of its ability to improve mood state and aggressivity. What else do I want to say? Reducing violence, superior efficacy, all true. So that's the morbidity reduced picture. And obviously, when other medicines have failed, Clozapine works. So from the reduction of morbidity, which is the way most doctors think about medicines, Clozapine is outstanding. But what's lost sight of is life extension. And I think that's something that really needs to be seriously impressed upon others, that patients who remain long-term on Clozapine, which is most of our patients, will live significantly longer on average than individuals either untreated, certainly, or treated with other less effective medicines. So psychiatrists are not accustomed to thinking in terms of saving lives and extending life. They're accustomed to thinking of improving life, but that message has to get out to them. I'm going to mention just one thing in closing about this current era we're in, and again, something about magic, about dates. When Clozapine was first introduced and first approved by the FDA, I got the letter on September 26th, 1989. Just so happens that a new medicine for treating schizophrenia symptoms was approved last year with a letter also dated September 26th, 2024, exactly 35 years later, to the day, which was amazing. It probably would not have meant anything to anyone other than me, but the fact that it was approved to the day, does that mean because it's a new medicine for schizophrenia, that ergo and necessarily now we have a new breakthrough and a new era has arisen because of this anniversary process? Well, obviously I feel that is not the case. Simply because there was a new medicine out there approved 35 years later. Is it the new gold standard? I say no, it is not. To be the new gold standard, you have to beat the old standard, which is us. It's Clozapine. So the new medicine that was approved last year on September 26 was tested against placebo only. There was no active comparator. So what does that mean? In the world of clinical research, that means the new medicine works, without a doubt. That new medicine works, but how well it works is not answered by that study. So how well it works is you will know that you have a medicine that works better than clozapine because in a mature market, you need to know that question. That's what clinicians want to know. Not does it work at all, but does it work better than what's out there? So I say to those newcomers, bring it on. You know, we accept the challenge if you're prepared to do it. So next year I'll be promoting somehow publicly, probably in a short article, that someone, namely the company that's promoting the new medicine, do a head-to-head comparison with us. And until then, it ain't over till it's over, okay? The clozapine story marches on, but while that story is not over, my presentation is over, and I thank you for your attention. I welcome news of discussion and questions from abroad or locally. Okay, sure, yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, we compile questions. We're going to ask audience questions. So let me just go for 1 second. Can you see me? Okay.
I think Don has a question.
Judy, come here. I don't know how to work. I want to see around it. I'm so sorry. Hello? So you can hear this. Okay. Okay. So in order to make this presentation work as beautifully as it went, which we're so thankful for, we lost control of seeing the questions. So, but anyway,
whatever it takes.
I know, exactly. So we're going to start with questions from those of you who are here. So who's got a question? Okay. Now you have to speak into the microphone, otherwise the world of Zoom cannot hear.
So I think I'd like you to comment on this whole concept of clozapine as a gold standard, which is grossly underutilized in our country in a way that's different for all medical conditions. Right? There are very few, I still can't think of a medical condition where the gold standard medication, even if the patent has run out, even if it's generic, is so underutilized. And where is AMA, APA, and others on this issue in your mind?
Well, I'm wired, so I'm good. I'm wired in every way. It's the Gatorade that does it. So where we are and where I think I'd like to be, I mean, I've got a number of things that I'm hoping to be able to do next year. But one way, although there's a slow lead time on this, but I'm accustomed to slow lead time, is to build this into psychiatric residency programs. I think one major way to do that, we're advanced in the sense that we now have these CME programs put together by Love, Kelly, John Kane. So we have, good materials. I think we now need to get those moved into the psychiatric residency programs and to establish a milestone for clozapine, that there's a clozapine milestone training that every psychiatric resident has to go through. And I think once that starts, the new residents will learn about clozapine in a manner that's more consistent with what the current status is, while others have been frightened in part by the early history of clozapine, as well as all the negative things that all the companies who have other products will be saying about clozapine. But the newer residents will, I think, have a fairer shot at good understanding. That's the semi-good news. What's not so good news is the lead time before their training ends up in practice. We're talking about a 10-year period between training and getting into practice. So it's not a pretty picture. And without a heavy investment from someone to do that, I'm not sure. It used to be back in the day that NIH was a very strong supporter of training programs. Whether that could ever happen again, I'm not sure. The need certainly exists. Rob's got some ideas.
I love that you call it the gold standard, but I think language really does matter. And I think a better way of phrasing it is it's the standard of care. That gives you a little medical legal standing. If we phrase it that way and people are treating their patients and violating the standard of care, they're practicing or it's malpractice. It's malpractice. And, I've tried for 15 years with a carrot, but I find sometimes you need the stick. And I think people have to realize that they are not practicing sound medicine. People are suffering. And if we start phrasing this, and people are, especially the APA is willing to adopt that language, this is the standard of care. Just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, I myself, thought about that maybe a year or two ago, and have a colleague who's in the forensic psychiatry field and knows a lot of lawyers, including a malpractice lawyer. I said, hey, it says right here in the package insert, et cetera, can't we sue physicians who are not following this? And so it's then that I learned about standard of care. So yes, we've got to, they can't be sued until there's an established standard of care. So you're right, how to do that, I'm not so sure, but you're obviously going in the right direction, as usual, Rob. But yeah, I said, sue them, and that will get their attention.
When you talk about reducing suicidality and harm and aggression, are you referring to only in patients with schizophrenia or people with all kinds of serious mental illness, like depression, borderline personality, bipolar?
I think I would probably follow the lead of the current package labeling for the suicide risk reduction indication, which is broader than the initial indication for schizophrenia treatment resistant. The second indication officially says schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder with prior history of suicidal acts, I would say, for aggressive acts. I would do that in part because I think the data are best in that regard, and the chances of success with the FDA much greater than if we broadened it. I would hope that the word would get out. Of course, physicians are free to use medicines any way they want, but I keep thinking in terms of my experience with the FDA, how do you get the approval done? And I would think that the chances of getting that indication much better by keeping it, as I've worded it in my docket, schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder.
So Janice has some other questions she's going to read.
What are the most common misconceptions doctors still have about clozapine?
I think the fear that it's a deadly medicine. The last thing you want to do is put your hands on medicine that's likely to kill your patients. I think that's just this massively misunderstood misconception about clozapine, when in fact, I mean, one of my biggest issues is you will hear other companies and speaking about even the agranulocytosis risk or any individual risk. What's important is to get the epidemiological data out there, which says clozapine patients live longer. Okay, you put it all together, individuals who either have reduced risk of self-harm or because they're in a much better psychological condition or maintain their physical health much more adequately than people who are not as well treated. Whatever the reason, in the aggregate, the data are compelling, study after study. I would always want to rephrase their misconception into the broader picture of patients on clozapine on average live longer, and here are the data in support of that.
How can a parent advocate for clozapine for their child, especially when in crisis in hospital?
Especially,
When they're in crisis in the hospital?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, but I would think the network of individuals like yourselves who've been in that advocacy role might know better than I. I mean, I'm great if someone came to me and what are the data in support of, let's say, reduced self-harm or reduced aggressivity, but how effectively to take that information and impact clinicians who may not be ready to receive that information, I'm not really sure. That is a tough problem. And even speaking with many of you before this presentation, you indicated your problems dealing with staff members who were recalcitrant or just didn't want to hear anything that you had to offer. I don't know how to deal with that.
Okay. How can clozapine side effects be managed?
Well, effectively, okay, the reason we're able to get clozapine to market in the investigational phase, frankly, was every time I was dealing with a major problem, whether it was hypertension, tachycardia, seizures, I always identified the problem quantitatively as well as I could and linked it almost in the same sentence with how it might be managed clinically. So that way of relating to the FDA, I think may have been somewhat atypical, but served us very well. Why? Because I never denied an adverse reactions problem with the FDA, and they knew they could count on my numbers, but yet I never offered raw data about an adverse reaction alone without offering a management technique with it. And so I had credibility with the FDA. And when the big problem came up with agranulocytosis, they believed our data because I had high credibility. So that worked very well in the investigational phase. But in the actual clinical application phase, in these last 35 years of use, your man is Rob Laitman and Ann Laitman, the folks who actually manage these. If you want management, adverse reactions, management information, a la 2025, here are your experts.
Oh, somebody asked, what did the black shirts say?
Oh, what did the black shirts say? Oh, really? Clozaril is the safest antipsychotic in the world. My words. My shirt.
We got to get a picture of that.
And why did I say that? I mean, in fact, Rachel called me. She said, it sounds great. She said, but, how can we justify it? On the same basis that I just mentioned, patients on clozapine live longer than patients who are not on clozapine. That is the ultimate safety parameter, in my view.
Somebody asked, how long should families keep trying other meds before trying clozapine?
Well, many of us believe, given clozapine special effectiveness, that it should be moved way earlier in treatment history, as in eventually, number one, because why not go to the best medicine as soon as possible? So there was a question, when did I think it should be used? As early as possible and waste as little time as possible. Nothing is worse than seeing someone go downhill when you know that, or at least you think there's a high expectation, they could be doing a lot better. So ASAP would be my answer.
One woman said, our son's doctor says treating his psychotic disorder is really a guessing game, and he needs to try different meds until he finds one that works. Is that true?
Well, it's sort of true, depending upon the sequence with which you're trying. This kind of gets back to the first question, which is, I would say, try the best medicine as early as possible. And so I think part of the question, the attitude implies that you're just going to kind of randomly try one after the other. Whereas, if the data are clear that clozapine is the most effective antipsychotic agent, positive and negative symptoms, et cetera, why not go there quickly? Rob, you were going to say?
Yeah, I just want to extrapolate. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the old dartboard approach, it just doesn't cut it in psychosis. I agree with Gil. I would use clozapine first also, but we don't have tremendous data on that. But there's tremendous data in especially the Scandinavian countries now, where there is no cherry picking. It's the entire population. And we know if you fail one drug, your chances are best if you move to clozapine after one drug. If you fail two drugs, you have a tiny percent. You're going to fail conservatively in 95% of the time. And that's a very conservative number. So in other words, 19 out of 20 times you try something else, it's not going to do much for you. You fail 3 drugs, you better be on clozapine. But it really is one. The data is already there. You fail one drug, you should be moving to clozapine. And that's with adequate levels, documented compliance.
Since Dr. Laitman has the microphone, can I ask him to just give some guidelines on ways you can advocate for clozapine when your loved one is in the hospital? Some of the things we talk about. Okay. Okay. So things that have been helpful for, my family and other families, this is going back to an earlier question, is educating the providers. So bringing in the Laitman book, bringing in articles, talking very clearly about the history and what are some of the things that haven't worked and why you're asking for clozapine. I know that we got a lot of pushback about clozapine being a last resort medication. And then I asked the doctors to define what that would look like. So given my kid's history, if this isn't a last resort, what is? Really kind of pushing and being just aggressive and persistent with that approach. Other things?
The clozapine handbook. Don't take it from the internist. Take it from someone in your field, so to speak. Yeah, so Jonathan Meyer's clozapine handbook, just show him the data. It agrees basically with what I just said before. Stop throwing darts at a dartboard and expect something good to happen because another, oh God, doesn't matter. People have said this, and we say this all the time. Time is brain. And, the longer you're psychotic, the more difficult it is to really return to your former functional state. These illnesses are not death sentences. These people do recover. And you just need to use the standard of care, which is clozapine.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just keep talking. Oh, yeah.
There's a question, I don't know that you're seeing them all.
So what's happening is Judy.
And I'm getting them.
Okay, I'm getting texts.
Oh, okay. And the reason being is that we wanted to focus on not as largely critical questions.
I'm trying to route the clinical questions to you, Rob. You're the maven.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's a good.
I got permission last night, a text message to, and I posted it on our website right after I spoke with Ann, that the referral to your Facebook group as well as to your Zoom meetings. So that is there in your protocol to become part of that. So if there are clinical questions about clozapine, Ann Mandel, Rob Laitman, are available to answer those questions about clozapine, so thank you. Janice is gonna.
Are there any new ways to give clozapine coming, injectables or liquids?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Well, there is a liquid. I was sure the question was a new liquid.
Yeah, there may be. There's already whatchamacallit, a transdermal preparation. that
Not
has
in this
easy
country.
Delivery, yeah.
Not,
Not
in,
out.
not in this country.
No, nothing in our country
Yeah.
yet. And we're very early at looking at putting implantable and removable clozapine. Problem is you can't do a long-acting injectable clozapine because once it's in, it's in. And because of the way the drug is handled in the body and the metabolism, if, for instance, you were to become ill, the levels
You
of
get it.
clozapine would skyrocket. So you need an ability to remove it. But we're hopeful that in the next few years, if we get adequate financing, we'll have something that is a weekly preparation.
Just for one clarification, there is a liquid form available. So was the question, will there be a liquid? Because there already is one. Or was the question, will there be a new one? There is one. So there is a liquid. It's called VersaClose. And I think, I can't remember. It's a small company that makes it. It may be called True Pharma. Maybe the company. So there is a liquid that is available. It's 50,
Even
it's 50, and I think the strength is, I think 50 milligrams per ml, I think, but in any case, it is available.
even though REMS ended, my child's doctor insists on monthly blood tests. Do you think he'll change his mind? Should it end?
Was the question the doctor insists on?
On monthly blood tests.
Well, if the doctor insists on that, that is now the doctor's right. In other words, what's happened with REMS is it's entirely in the doctor's hands to decide, as with any other medicine, whether and with any other set of side effects. So it may not be unreasonable. We don't know the exact situation. So I don't know how to describe that. That has to now be an individual doctor-patient situation. I can tell you, though, from my point of view, having negotiated a lot having to do with the original patient monitoring system, that in my view, regular monthly monitoring is, if not useless, almost useless. Now, if the doctor felt that there was some evidence of infection developing or whatever, but it's not going to pick up. It would be unusual to pick up a developing agranulocytosis with monthly testing, because we tracked the rate at which white blood cell counts dropped, and they would, if they were going to drop, they would be dropping before 1 month. So the possibility of picking something up on routine monthly testing seemed to us pretty slim. But in that regard, let me just point out what happened with REMS and what happened with this clozapine monitoring system. We developed, and when medicine first came to market in 1990, every patient had a weekly white blood cell test. And then with more information over the course of time, after 6 months, as you know, it was every 2 weeks. And then with additional data at 1 year, it was once monthly after that. What would have been the logical progression? the curse and the blessing of the present that I got from Hatch and Waxman was 5 years. That was great. It was 5 years of patent protection. But the bad news is it was 5 years of patent protection. Why? Because in the evolution of a medicine that's going to stay on the market sometime with a special problem like this, you accumulate a lot more information. So that process that went from weekly forever to weekly every 2 weeks, and then every weekly, twice a month, and then monthly, that process should have continued. If there's a company that still was actively promoting the medicine, that would have changed over time. And we would have avoided the whole Fed situation coming in 2015. What would have happened would be, I think, many years earlier, arriving at where we are today. With physician education, it's an issue for the doctor to decide whether that particular patient requires regular monitoring. It's a doctor's choice, and that would have been the evolution had a pharma company with a maintained interest in it been able to do that, because you accumulate huge amounts of data, and the data would have supported the fact that after 1 year it's totally unnecessary to mandate that. The doctor feels there's a situation, of course, you proceed on the best interest of the patient, but not on a mandatory basis. So what would have happened, I think, is we would have been where we are in 2025 with no REMS, leave it to the doctor. But there's 2025 versus 1990 when it started. So that process, if there had been an active sponsor still making money, but improving the package labeling, that would have happened long ago.
In Europe, the new guidelines are going to be no monitoring after 2 years, because their feeling is that there's more of a chance of doing harm with the monitoring, in that they're going to get false positives that are going to result in the mistaken belief that this is agranulocytosis, secondary to clozapine, as opposed to, for instance, COVID or another viral infection. But that's just the European guideline.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on a second. Okay, somebody asked, how does Cobenfy compare with clozapine? And which one would you use if you had treatment-resistant patient on Zyprexa or Risperidol?
It sounds like a couple of questions in one. So
Yeah.
give me the first. How
Part.
about the first question again, please?
How does, I guess it's Cobenfy
Cobenfy.
compare with clozapine?
So I did not identify the name of that medicine when I said if you want to be the new gold standard, those are the guys I'm talking about, right? So they just came out with this medicine that came to market based on a placebo-controlled trial, okay, which means that the medicine works. But we have had, since 1954, we've had a bunch of medicines that work. Now we're in a situation where we have a medicine that works better than anything else. And if you want to play with the big boys, then you've got to do a comparative study against my medicine. Godfather of Clozapine. You want to take on my baby? Go ahead. Okay, but it's got to be a fair fight. But so yeah, at this point there is no evidence whatsoever that Cobenfy would be a better choice. So none. So that was that question number one.
That's
Yeah.
and you answered that question. Yes, that's
Oh.
good.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, somebody asked, what innovations or best practices have improved the safety of clozapine?
Well, from my perspective, as a clinical research guy, I can't think of anything, in the clinical research literature, but again, I would turn things over to the clinicians who have done a lot of stuff that suggests, weight management, diabetes, insulin level management. So I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that, but I think the clinicians who deal with this daily are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you start with early use. I mean, I'm just going to quote my ease, but really assertive management of all the side effects that, Gil already mentioned. He had worked through so much of this. It was all in the literature to find. and really changing the titration schedule, going so much slower than what's recommended in the PDR has made an enormous difference. And also the realization that if you're on clozapine, you really do need support. So that engagement, you can't come on and off clozapine. It is by far the most effective medicine, but the rebound from it is also the worst. So you have to be on board. It has to be a full commitment. And if you do those 3 or 4 things, start early, you're really assertive about managing it. Therapeutic drug monitoring, again, standard of care. I can't tell you how many times I hear the story, oh, we just look at him and that's good enough. No, it's not good enough. It really is a dose response curve with this drug. And you really need to know where you're at. And just, going slow and being patient and then fully engaging. And the thing that makes clozapine so wonderful is people get well enough that you can start to do all these great recovery-oriented treatments. Going to NAMI, and going NAMI Unite and being in a social group, doing cognitive education or enhancement treatments, cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of trauma involved with these things. A lot of these kids have to talk it through. Really, when they're on clozapine, they're well enough that they can then work on even getting better. So that's where I think the future is, that realization that meaningful recovery is something, it's a lot of work. And that's what I mean by treatment models. I think, I'd like to, propose that, what's our treatment model? Use the most effective treatment like we would in any other medicine, and use it as early as possible, and then provide the services to make it the most effective. I'll
We have a
put
question
plug
in the
in,
audience.
been sitting there
We have an
patiently.
audience
We have
question.
Dora Mind, and they're out there to help you too.
We'll have a lot of.
Okay, the problem that I asked before was the doctors look at this, they don't even look at the serum levels. And problem I'm having is that my son is not at the therapeutic level and they're not increasing his medication. They're just saying it's fine. They're not following what the levels should be. So how do we get the doctors to, they're just like, it looks like they're just barely doing what they should be doing, not following the protocol on a therapeutic level. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but I heard the serum level should be at least at 300 where you're getting the effectiveness of the medication. I don't know exactly the number. I'm not going to argue. I'll leave it to you guys. But I do know that my son is at 210, 220, and it's kind of like 2.5 years. He's just stagnant. We have no, I want to get him better, but the doctor that's writing him the scripts and his team is kind of like, they're not doing their jobs, I feel like. And it's like they're gypping him out of quality of life when he's already on the medicine. How do I go about this? It's almost like they're just half his recovery.
Bring cookies and bring books and bring information. Bring even the Clozapine handbook. It's right there.
And
It's a
Not to
really
cut you-
critical part.
not to
of
cut you off, but
management.
I've done that. I tell them who you are. I tell them everything that I need to tell them, and they look at it like it's almost like an ego thing that, oh, well, our doctors don't do it this way. They kind of downplay, the right way. And I don't know. I don't even know what to do at this point. I give them the handbook. I give them the website. I show them everything. I give them all the protocols. And it's an ACT team. And I'm thinking of getting off the ACT team, but he's AOT, and I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, no, I've struggled with ACT teams and AOTs, and in fact, I'm going to court to renew another kid's AOT just next week, and ACT teams, I mean, especially when they're used to dealing only with psychiatrists, and I come in, I say, I always identify myself. I am not a psychiatrist. I'm an internist. Here, someone, they will try to turn away. That's the usual. So it is a struggle, but you just have to continue to educate them. That's why I specifically mentioned the Clozapine handbook. That was written by the foremost psychopharmacologists that were psychiatrists. That was, Stahl and Meyer. And most training programs do refer to Stahl all the time. Are you using his pharmacology book? Well, I'm only showing you what he is saying. So you can use my name, but depending on, who knows me, who's gone to the lectures and all the rest, you're going to, not get very far a lot of times. But Stahl and Meyer, use them because pretty much they all know them and they are saying the right things.
Don has a question. Don has a question.
I'm gonna just read a couple.
Okay.
You suggested clozapine shouldn't be a last resort medication, but for a first-time option for certain patients, can you explain more specifically why you feel, especially given the side effects profile, what has changed in the data or practice that supports moving it earlier in treatment? So I think all of us have heard that from medical professionals about the side effects. And I know I've told them that there's ways to address it. So how can we say, from a data point of view, why it should be addressed that way?
Is the question about early use? I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
So how would you phrase the question again?
Why should clozapine be used as in the very beginning for even forgetting about failing on other medications? Why should this, how does the data support doing that given the side effects?
Well, from my point of view, I think a point that had been raised earlier has to do with kind of the natural history of psychoses. And that is that if a psychotic episode is not well treated, followed by relapse, the ability to restore someone to a prior level of functioning or a better level of functioning is that much more difficult. So from my point of view, the goal is to try to prevent relapse. So that means if you're treating an individual sequentially with medicines that are less effective than what's available, you are running the risk of it altering the life course in ways that most individuals in this room have had loved ones who've had all the wrong medicines for years and years and finally got on clozapine. So the ability for clozapine to restore, is great, but it would have been a lot easier to have not had those lost years in between from a functional point of view, school, social, et cetera, et cetera. So for all those good reasons, clozapine should be used as early as possible. But if the question is side effects, every medicine has side effects, and every doctor should know how to deal with adverse effects. We've had enough discussion already that many doctors do not. So there is a great need for better education. But as of last week, that there is now this set of webinars, including one is offered by Jonathan Meyer. So we've got some big names who will be doing training. Hopefully these will be required, possibly not only in residency programs, but in active treatment settings as well. So there is hope, I think, that the word may get out. But I think the great travesty is to have individuals who have overly long histories of psychotic episodes with difficult recoveries and perhaps regrettable behaviors during those failed treatment episodes, so that the idea of the most effective treatment from a therapeutic point of view as early as possible makes sense, because there are very few adverse reactions with clozapine that cannot be managed successfully.
This question is gray in the terms of clinical versus research, but it's one that personally I think about all the time. You mentioned that part of the reason why clozapine isn't prescribed more often is because it's generic and it doesn't have the marketing push. Do you think the lack of awareness among psychiatrists is mainly financial? Or is there still hesitation in the field because of its monitoring requirements? You know, I just have to say that in the beginning of my loved one's journey with this, I did sign a study about Clozapine in the beginning of the journey. And it's in the back of my mind always. You know, how much of the makers of Clozapine funded the administration of medication where he started his journey? So is there enough of a pharma push for some of these other medications that we will always be competing with Clozapine? So, I mean, that's the intimation of this question, and maybe I'm making assumptions here, but awareness among psychiatrists is mainly financial.
When you say financial, do you mean financial to the financial benefit of the psychiatrist, or that there are financial interests that are motivating and providing information that to psychiatrists that kind of precludes or pushes Clozapine to the
I guess it's both, because I think the conversation really is in a large institutional setting. You know, is there financial reward for that large institutional setting to prescribe certain medications versus others? Individual psychiatrists, I can't speak to that journey. I don't know.
So I'm not sure whether the right word is reward, because you're not allowed to reward, you know, for the use of a medicine. But I think the role of money in the marketing of medicines is really crucially important. And the ones that have active marketing departments behind them are going to be able to have the loudest voice. So when I talk about, you know, the signal being lost in the noise, especially now, for example, you cannot turn on TV without seeing a Cobenfy ad. So there's a lot of money going into getting that name out there, and with that, you know, pressures to for doctors to talk about Cobenfy, and that's what marketing companies do. But there's nobody pushing Clozapine, so there's some way to kind of correct that. I'm not sure, but so the role of money in the sense of creating voice is certainly important, and has always been important in pharma.
It's more important than ever.
Yeah.
And, you know, Rob, with the reformulation of Clozapine, as you referred to, will that inject some marketing money into that?
Well, ask me after you ask Rob.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far away. I don't think Big Pharma is terribly interested in Clozapine in any formulation. I think they've, that ship unfortunately has sailed, because there's always going to be the oral formulations. There's just too many generics around. So even if we do get a reasonable weekly, and I think that's about as far as we're going to take it in any, you know, foreseeable future, I think it's going to be probably a nonprofit pharmaceutical company that'll model it, and by its nature, it doesn't have a lot of money. So, but at least, you know, we can perhaps get it to market.
A follow-up question. With your clinical research hat on, do you see it's at all possible that we have a Clozapine 2.0 that we can call, it's just different enough that it gets marketed under another name, so we get money behind it and all the sexy drug reps out there talking about how great it is? Do you see that that's even a possibility one day?
Yes, I do. But you need a company that is interested in developing antipsychotics. That's no longer Novartis. Now, it may be because Bristol Myers got into the Cobenfy business, that may encourage others. So the answer is yes, it's theoretically possible, comma, but nobody can figure out how the hell Clozapine works. It's a miracle. Nobody. Well,
I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question.
right.
But
And
why is it so uniquely different that nobody's been able to?
an article with that very title, you know, essentially was published last year. Why is it that Clozapine is so different, right? And nobody can answer that. And that is the question. So yes, always, if you can find a medicine that, you know, equals another medicine's therapeutic profile without a similar adverse reaction profile, that's a good thing. And that had been tried. I mean, when clozapine came out in 1990, just as when chlorpromazine came out in 1954, other companies rushed in like, whoa, there's a market here and a whole new indication. That happened, with clozapine. Nobody thought it was possible, as you know, this is, the Superman guy, made it happen, right? But then other companies said, well, now we have a second generation of medicines, okay? It's not olanzapine, it's not Risperdal, it's not Seroquel, and all tried, and marketing it, olanzapine, Zyprexa, in particular, the sales rep said, hey, we're clozapine without the blood tests. But it's not clozapine without the blood test. So, but that is the goal, and that is the way it should be. When I talk about 35 years, it's not automatic at 35 years, but the test should be, as I said, it's clozapine, take me on, yes, that's how progress is made. It's not going to be clozapine forever, but it will be clozapine forever unless somebody's brave enough. Nobody in those 35 years has really come up with a randomized controlled trial that proves they're better than clozapine, but they should keep trying. Otherwise, clozapine is great, but there will be, another generation. But it requires pharma companies to be interested in this indication, to be interested in your loved ones, and to say, yes, we're going to get behind this. There's a lot that's going to happen over the course of the coming next years. For example, what we call schizophrenia, or what we call psychotic behavior, probably covers a number of etiologies, okay? There's a lot of work going on and to come up with more precise ways of identifying the different etiologies of schizophrenia, and with that, possibly different medications that may be more appropriate. That's at least 5 or 6 or maybe 8 or 10 years down the line. So there's going to be improvements in diagnosis, and there will be improved therapies, even without improvement in diagnosis, but you got to take on clozapine. I mean, just take us on, and yes, that's how progress will be made, but not without a heavy investment of dollars and a commitment by companies that say, yeah, we want to be back in this business.
Janice does have another question.
I have another question. Just get this. Oh, does clozapine continue to be effective when used for many decades?
Well, you saw Kevin's picture, right? Okay, that's 40 years, all right? And so the answer is yes, and likely many more decades than if the patient were treated with some other medicine. Why? Because the data on longevity are terrific for clozapine patients living longer. So it's a better quality of life and a longer life. That, when the public health authorities talk about medicines or treatments in general, they talk about morbidity and mortality, okay? So we understand with morbidity, clozapine in the short run works better than other, in general, it can't, not every patient, but in general works better than other medicines. But the other thing that epidemiologists look at is death. That is when you die and what medicines you're on when you die. And clozapine patients just simply live longer than individuals who do not. So by both measures, to answer that question, you're going to live longer and a higher quality of life on average.
I have a fun question.
I hope we got a matching answer.
Somebody in our audience is a videographer, and he'd love to interview and make a film. I told him I would get back to him. So anyway, we can follow up on that one. But any more questions? I think we're good for now. So many of them, ask about specific medication regimens and combinations of things. Oh, yeah. So,
I'm going to coach someone who might want to ask me a question.
okay.
So the question from someone might be, so we understand that you're interested in trying to get a new third indication for anti-aggression,
Okay.
Will there be a fourth?
And what would that fourth be?
I was hoping that someone would ask me, what would that fourth be? So yes, after I'm successful, I hope, with the hope of all these others piling on with indication number 3, I'm hoping next year, if we can get that one done, that there will be another one that I'm looking at, which would be Parkinson's disease psychosis.
Interesting.
That will be number 4 for me. If I, but I'm going to put a lot of energy into number 3. So that's part of what's going to occupy me next year. You might well ask, well, what else are you going to be doing since you're such a busy person, right?
So what else are you going to be doing?
I was hoping somebody might ask. So that is one. I'm not sure to what extent the story of the evolution of clozapine was interesting, but a colleague and I, Dr. Bill Reed, who's a psychiatrist in Texas, are writing a book on the story of clozapine. So some of the highlights that I suggested that I tried to tell the story tonight will be in more detail in a book-length, readable version, not for the technical audience, but for the general audience. So we're going to be very busy in the first half. Besides all this other stuff we're doing, we have now a contract, and we're going to get this done in the first half of next year. That's the thing.
wonderful. That's wonderful.
That's all the question I want to coach you on.
Okay. So you will, go on.
I just wanted to say that many of the participants have expressed their thank yous for doing what you're doing.
Well,
So
I
thank you.
appreciate that. And in turn, I thank you guys for everything you're doing, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really great. So thank you.
It is our pleasure. And I think what we've already established too over the past year is that you have an advocacy arm with Angry Moms and NAMI and Team Daniel. So I think that the future does look bright. And I think we need to be very hopeful about that. That we do have a treatment protocol, that the EASE method that is very successful. And all the things that we've mentioned tonight, we have to continue to spread the word. And, you know, I'm forever hopeful and forever an advocate. So we got your back. We got your back.
And I've got you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Liz. That was great. Thank you so much. Great to be here. Thank you, Judy. Thank you.